So while I've been hemming and hawing over the past few weeks, Album Club has continued on the Discord regardless. So for those of you who need a refresher, Album Club is this weekly music sharing club that we have on the Discord where one person submits one album a week and we all have a listen. Sort of like Oprah's book club if Oprah listened to a lot more death metal. If you want to kind of join in on the fun of Album Club, you can do that, and you can also support the channel by heading on over to patreon.com/LachlanLikesAthing, which I've linked in the description of this video. Besides supporting the channel, you can also show your musical taste to the world, and I get $1 a month, which is great. So everybody wins. Yay! So Album Club rotates every week, and I usually feature the Album Club album of the week on Music Mondays. But since I haven't done a Music Mondays in a while, there's now quite a backlog of Album Club albums that I haven't mentioned, and they're good albums. So I think I want to rectify that situation by rounding them all up, and on this episode of Music Mondays, going through them all in one big go. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through the past 4 or 5 weeks of Album Club submissions. And we're going to start with Alphanumerics 1's submission processed by the British producer Sampha, which was released in 2017. It's a debut album.
It's so high up in mountain out here. I'm made out of plastic out here. You touched down in the base of my fears. Houston, can you hear?
Here's the story. I actually got a chance to meet Alpha, the person who submitted this album to Album Club. I actually had a chance to meet him when he came down to Sydney. And naturally, being the kind of geeks that we are, we decided to go on a bit of a headphone safari. And one of the things that we had to listen to was the Stax L700, which I've heard many times, and I was sort of gleefully kind of wanting to set upon this unsuspecting person. You know, I've mentioned a few times that I really love the L700. I won't say anything more about it, except for the fact that it was really fun to watch the color kind of drain from Alpha's face when he was demoing a track. And I could tell that right then he loved it, and it would ruin him for all the other headphones. Perfect. But I was kind of curious what exactly he was listening to on the L700. So I had a listen, and it was also my turn to kind of be completely floored, because it was on this album, Plastic 100 Degrees, and it's this incredible track that melds this throbbing low bass tone that is just insistent throughout the track, combined with these really delicate and, for lack of a better word, pretty kind of harp-like progressions that surround the central focus of this track, which is Sampha's vocals, which are just really raw and vulnerable. And that's the key word for me here with this album. It's the word vulnerability, because as I can garner from interviews and also from the kind of emotional tone and the actual lyrics themselves of this album is about Sampha's sort of grieving process as he kind of deals with the death of his mother due to cancer. So it's a R&B or a kind of hip hop album that really deals with some heavy issues, and it kind of toes this line between really being tightly controlled with this really well thought out production, and at the same time being dramatically expressive. And I think it's absolutely worth a listen. It's just the kind of music that is written thoughtfully, and it shows. So, you know, check out the link in the description of this video where you can have a listen to and buy this album. The next album is Very Unfortunate's submission, and I'm going to pronounce this completely incorrectly. It's Sneeuwland by Oskar Schuster, a German artist. So this music is kind of what I like to call toy box music. It's this whimsical, kind of almost like fairy tale like music that you can really imagine putting on on a rainy afternoon, or just when you want a bit more whimsy to your life, as if you were living some kind of indie documentary. This is another one of those albums where I put it on and then 5 tracks later, I have no idea what I've listened to, but I kind of feel imbued with a sense of childlike wonder. There's not much more I can really say about this kind of music, to be honest. You're either in the mood for it or you aren't. But I think it's one of those things where it's good to have in your library just for one of those lazy afternoons where the mood is absolutely right for this kind of music. So again, you can check out a link in the description of this video where you can support the artist through their Bandcamp. So the next album is Beautiful Flight by the Japanese contemporary jazz group Zettrio, and this was brought to us by none other than our resident maid advisor, Eugene. So, this album is kind of crazy. It's this contemporary jazz trio that's really led by the performance of the pianist, who kind of pulls the whole group through these really sprightly, really kind of babbling and exciting and just playing really, really fast piano performances. And they all have this kind of slick, modern, optimistic feel to them, kind of like the album Melodies that I mentioned in an earlier Music Mondays. I like this album. It's the kind of perfect music to do things with because it kind of propels you through the day. It's playful and at times a bit unhinged, especially with the vocalizations that the group members are fond of doing on the album. Audio! So the only sort of the only sort of criticism I have of this album is that sometimes when I listen to it, I feel like telling the pianist, dude, slow down. Because there's times when I think that the priority is being placed on kind of virtuoso speed of the performance rather than kind of dynamic expression, which I wish there was a little bit more of. And it sort of reminds me of, the total opposite situation when I was in a string group in high school. And I was terrible, but the second violinist in the group, he was this guy who could play his part in a way that was so sweet and it could bring you to tears. And it very nearly brought the conductor to tears because she kept saying, I need you to play faster. It's really nice that you can make this beautiful tone, but please just do it faster. And for some reason, he just would not play faster. It was as if he was this great artiste that had to wring every single milliliter of emotion out of every bowstring that he made. So yeah, that's sort of the opposite situation of this album, but you know what I'm getting at. If you play an instrument, you know that it's pretty hard to play fast and also be able to convey dynamic nuance. For me, I just did the third thing, which was to play badly. Now, for a complete change of pace is the album The Impossible Kid by the American rap producer Aesop Rock. And this was submitted by Barun on the Discord.
Used to draw, hard to admit that I used to draw. Portraiture in a human form, doodle of a two-headed unicorn. It was soothing, moving his arm in a fusion of man-made tools and a...
Now, this was a really interesting album because... if the last album that we talked about featured a piano virtuoso, then this album features a lyrical virtuoso, because this is some of the most literate rap that I have ever heard in terms of the construction of the verse, in terms of the very esoteric word choices and the concepts themselves that are explored in this album. So Aesop Rock has been making rap for 20 years, and to give you an example, there's one track on this album that really gets me, and it's the track Rings. And on that track, Aesop Rock talks about how he, when he was younger, he had this kind of budding artistic bent. He pursued illustration and drawing, and he went to art school. And then at some point he decided he needed to focus on music, and he abandoned drawing and he let his skills deteriorate. And now, 20 years later, he looks back on that time and he feels that sense of regret that he let that potential kind of dissipate, and he kind of wonders what could have been. And that's a fairly abstract subject to make a somewhat aggressive rap song about, but he pulls it off. I can relate to the sentiment in this track in particular because I've always had a fondness for illustration or drawing, and I've always felt that if I fully committed myself to it, I could get somewhere with it, but I never find the time, and I end up feeling kind of sick and guilty about it. And this kind of track really makes you question, as Aesop Rock does in the lyrics. And he asked the question of how do we assess achievement? How do we end up setting these kind of benchmarks for ourselves, and what does it mean when we end up feeling guilty about it? Because obviously we can't master everything that we want to do in life. So yeah, it's a really thoughtful kind of track. So Aesop Rock is obviously very comfortable with writing verse, and he takes the art form very seriously. The one thing that I kind of had trouble with this album was that sometimes I found that the lyrics are so kind of convoluted, they're so Byzantine, that they almost come off like punchlines, and I felt like it was sometimes hard to connect emotionally to the sentiment that he was expressing in the lyrics. And that's combined with the production of this album, which is, it's a recent album, but it uses a lot of really old school tones, and it's nostalgic, but at times it also feels a little cheesy or a little chintzy. I don't know, that might be entirely my kind of personal preference, but that's something that distanced me a little from this album. But overall, I really do recommend you have a listen to it if you want to hear some really artfully constructed lyrics. And again, you can find a link to the album in the description of this video. So the last album that I'm going to talk about is the album Out There and Back from the well-known German electronic producer Paul van Dyk, which was submitted by Chillfire on the Discord. Chillfire himself reckons that this is Paul van Dyk's best studio album. And he comments on a sense of progression and flow and energy that carries through this entire album. And I really have to agree with that. Maybe I've been playing too much Motorsports Manager, but to me, the synths and the beats in this album, although they're old school, they really convey this kind of pulsing energy that would be perfect for, say, racing game music. Even though it's sort of old school, this album comes from the 90s, and it really does sound like it comes from the 90s. There's still a lot of interesting choices, I think, going on in the way this music is written, particularly in some of these tracks where you have these kind of atonalities that really don't fit well with the main melody. And it's not just all kind of Darude Sandstorm, it's also music that I think you still have to have an affection for the old school, for that 90s German electronic sound. But if you want to check out that kind of music, I think this is a pretty good starting place. So again, you can check out a link to this music in the description of this video, and also you can check out the link to join in on the fun on Album Club, to join our Discord, and to support the channel. That's at LachlanLikesAthing.patreon blah blah blah. That's at patreon.com/LachlanLikesAthing. And yeah, and you can help keep the videos going. And next time I see you, we'll kind of return to the regular format of Music Mondays. And until then, happy listening and see ya.